Hi, this is Bob from Hobby Concepts. Today I'm going to build this Tamiya 3-speed transmission that they use in their semi-trucks like the King Hauler, Globeliner, Cascadia, pretty much all their trucks. This is actually a redo of an earlier video that I had done that was very popular, but I've got some new techniques in here. I watched that old video. I thought I could do a better job of showing every little detail. So that's what I'm going to do. Let's get started. Here's the Tamiya transmission parts laid out. So we have the half cases, we have the nylon gear parts, we have the shift dog slider shaft, we have the gear shafts, some of the gears, motor, the transmission end bells, the spacers, the liquid thread lock and grease that come with the kit, and the sintered bronze bushings. So these are the parts you need to build the transmission, plus the nuts, bolts, and screws, which I always drop into a marked bread pan so that I can pull them out easily. I'm going to go through every single detail part on this transmission and build it one piece at a time. Okay, first thing are the sintered bronze bushings. I generally replace these with ball bearings, even though the bronze bushings work fine. Ball bearings I think are even better. There's 4 6x12s and there's 10 5x11s. You can get those from a Tamiya ball bearing kit or individually. And I'm going to talk about this because sometimes some people prefer only to use 2 of the 6x12. So when we get to that point, I'll show what I'm talking about. First thing I like to do are prep the parts, and that includes cutting out the transmission cases. I use a pair of flush cut nippers. These are God hand nippers which cut really closely. Transmission case. But now here's something you really want to watch for. Even with these super fine cutters, there's still a nub sticking up on both sides. And this gear needs to sit completely flat to work properly. So you need to cut off the remaining bit of that nub and make sure that the surface is completely flat. You'll notice that several of the nylon gears do that when you cut them out. So I can cut this one out. Again, these are really good cutters, but you can hopefully really see how those nibs are sticking up. I can cut them off with my side cutters, but most side cutters won't cut them off flush enough. These will, but I still like to just make sure they're really flush with an X-Acto knife blade. So I'll cut the rest of these gears out. In the Tamiya assembly instructions, we start with the gear shafts. There's 2 different shafts, an A and a B shaft. The difference is apparent from the instructions. So we're going to start with the A shaft. And that requires putting on one of these little snap rings. Now these snap rings can be a real pain in the rear. But I have found, first off, I use tweezers to pick them up. But I have found an easy way to snap the first couple is just to put them on your table and push down the shaft. And that just snaps them on easily. So in the instructions you put these 2 rings on first. And then the next step is the 20-tooth gear, and that's this aluminum gear right here. And it fits over the end and just slides over the splines right there. And once it's slid over the splines, we put another snap ring on. Now these snap rings aren't too bad because you can lay them right on the gear and just pull them in with a pair of pliers. So basically I got a flat surface to slide it on, and that latches it on quite easily. So the second gear is this gear with a little hub on it, and it fits into this gear, so it makes a solid unit like that. You push it all the way in. There's only one gear that matches, and it fits over here, that set of splines, and then we do the same thing, another snap ring. Basically the same thing. It'll sit on top, basically sits pretty flush. Grab it with a pair of pliers and just snap it in. So that's all there is to assembling these shafts. Now this end right here of the shaft uses the same technique. It needs a snap ring. And I'm going to do it on my table, but I have to do it on the edge here since it has gears on it. And then we use the brass colored hex adapter that's on actually fits into this gear, and it's pretty apparent which direction it goes, and then that drops in here like this, so that the shoulder end is down, and then the same thing, we put another snap ring on. Drop it on here. Pull it in with our pliers. And that finishes gear shaft A. Gear shaft B, you can see I already snapped on my snap ring. Goes together very similarly to A. We're going to make our first change. So this gear here drops on. Instead of using the bronze bushings, I'm going to use a 6x12 ball bearing in each side. Since I used a ball bearing, I don't need to grease the shaft. So that'll slide on just like that. It rotates freely. And we'll use a snap ring on the other side. Hold it on. Again, this is flat like a table. Makes it real easy to snap that on. Okay, now it's time for, this is basically a clutch dog. And the way this works is these pins fit into the slots on this gear or pull back and the pins fit into another gear. Now, this part then has to slide back and forth on the shaft. Some people feel that the bronze bushings are better here. We'll put those in because they're a little sloppier and they slide back and forth on the shaft better. And I have built a lot of transmissions this way with the bronze bushings in this gear. If you use these, they need to be glued. Just a couple tiny drops of CA glue on each one when you push them in, because they're not a tight fit, and when this slides back and forth they can pop out. Now I have also had good luck using the ball bearings. Ball bearings fit in here. And you can see what I mean when they pop out. They slide back and forth on the shaft just fine. So some people swear by the fact that you don't want to use ball bearings here and use bushings. Some people use ball bearings. I've done it both ways. I don't think there's a big advantage one way or the other, but gluing these in is definitely an advantage. So I'm going to go ahead and use the bearings on this transmission. So I'll just put a tiny drop of medium CA on 3 places around the edge of that. And I'll push it into place. I do the same thing with the other side. Just a couple little tiny drops of CA glue. Don't need much. And we'll let those dry for a second and put this in. Now, because this slides back and forth on the shaft, you do want to use some of the Tamiya ceramic grease on that shaft. That slides back and forth just fine. So that drops on there like that. And then we're going to put a clip on there that will keep it from falling off. Now, that clip, you don't have a nice flat place to lay it unless you hold the gear up a little bit. So that's my secret. I slide that up and then I can lay it on there like it's a table. Keeps that in place, and then I can snap this on. And Tamiya does give you extra C-clips because chances are you're going to shoot one across the room. Okay, we're going to do this end. So there's 2 different Hex Adapted Gears. You notice this one has the larger slots and they match up to these. So we're going to drop this washer on here per the instructions, and then this bushing with the shoulder up, and then this drops on here, and you can see that this then slides up into that gear. So that fits just fine. Now, unlike pretty much every place else, there's a clip here for an E-ring, but an E-ring doesn't go on there. So don't try to figure out why. They just don't use an E-ring there. You don't have to grind down the shoulder or do anything weird. That does not have a clip there. You're so used to putting clips in that sometimes you want to try and get that on there. So we do that, and then the next thing is the big gear, and it uses 2 5x11 bearings. And drops on here. Now you can see that this slides into that. So you want to, because this moves, you want to add a little bit of grease here. Okay, so we'll put that back on, and we'll put this on, and these aren't a super tight fit, but it doesn't matter because when we're all done stacking things up, nothing will fall off. Okay, so we've got the big gear on there. Then we put on a nylon spacer, which then of course lines us up with our last clip. That fits on there nicely. Lines up. There went one. Everybody does it. That's why they give you more. If you build these on carpet, it will disappear forever. Okay, so that's how that goes. We can do the other end here, and that one, we've already got a clip here. We use our other bushing, face down, and another clip. Okay, and then of course something's going to slide on here, so we'll put a little grease on it. And that is this gear. And it fits like that, on that direction. Flat side goes down. This gear then matches onto that, and you can see the cuts in here to match the pins. So we'll put a couple bearings in it. Now if you remember, if you're using bushings, you want to grease these shafts. We're using bearings, so we don't need to. So this drops on here, gives us our flat spot for the clip. Clip on. Okay, gear shaft B is done. Okay, next is the shift shaft. Now this is a king hauler transmission. Some of the other kits have a slightly different way of putting the shift pawls on than the king hauler, so just follow the instructions. They essentially work the same way. You put the clips on and stack up the parts. These are the little tiny clips, and they are a real pain. They are tiny, they are hard to handle. I'm going to use my workbench again, if I can, to clip these on. Here. Even my regular tweezers won't grab them. I have to use these fine point jobs. Okay, so on this transmission, it tells you to look for the end with the short nub. So we're going to do the short nub. We're going to put some grease on this because these shift pawls have to slide on here. So we're going to grease this up. We stack on shift pawl like this and a spring. Now these are the silver springs. The kit comes with black springs and silver springs. The black springs are for the shocks. The silver springs are for the transmission. Then we put a shift pawl on. Notice the direction of the hub facing out. Then we have a spacer. Then we put a shift pawl with it facing in, and another spring. So that is our completed shift shaft, and we'll just set that aside. Time to assemble one of the end plates. There's a bearing retainer that mounts in here, and for that there's a little capture port for the nut. And when I'm building transmissions, I'm always going to use thread lock. These things vibrate like crazy. use thread lock on pretty much all the bolts and nuts down here in this end. Don't need a lot. This Tamiya thread lock works pretty good, and if you ever need to take it apart, it's removable, and a little heat really helps it to come apart pretty easily. So we've got that bearing retainer in. Now you do want to put it on the correct side. The instructions show you to have this bump over that direction, and that goes in that end. And then we're going to install 3 of the shafts that hold the transmission together. So same thing, little thread lock. These shafts are threaded. I find it quite easy to hold the screw with my finger and thread the shaft onto it. Put a couple of those on. Now don't install all 4 of these because you can't get the shafts in if you do. So you only install the 3 that they show you. Okay, there's our end. Now the instructions show you to turn this around, install a bearing, and then install the shafts. Now they show you greasing all the gears. I do not grease the gears before I put these in because it just makes them a complete pain to handle. So this drops in here like this, and you can see without grease on it, it's pretty nice to put on. This bearing retainer does not have nuts and bolts to hold it. It just snaps in. Bearing fits in it, and our shaft fits in like that, and you can see how the gears all line up. Now the trick is we have to get this into here, and these shift pawls fit into these 3 slots. So that's why I don't put grease on it, because with grease on it, it is a messy pain in the rear. So we'll show you how to grease it later. So it doesn't fit this way, so what I do is pull the gears out, line these up, so it's one assembly, and I just kind of hold it with my hands like this, so it's ready to go in, and then work it into place. You gotta make sure that your springs have stayed on there. Okay, this spring needs to go back on. Everything's lined up, looks right. So that was pretty straightforward. And now what we're going to do is mount this end, hold everything. So we need to install the bearing retainers, and 2 bearings, and then this just slides on, and all the shafts line up. Make sure that everything is hooked in place. These are especially important. Turn it, make sure everything works a little bit, and then we're going to install the screws in the other end. Same thing, we're going to use a little thread lock on these screws. Yep, everything's still lined up. Okay, we now can turn this. Everything's turning good. Our input is the motor right here, and our output is going to be right here. So when we shift it, we select different gear ratios depending on where we're at. So there's a low gear, a high gear, and a medium gear. You can see how that works. And we're going to hook this to a motor later and run it. So that's all put together. Our final thing to do, well, we do have to install another one of these shafts in here, but I'm going to put the output collar on first. There's a little nylon bushing that mounts on here, and then the output collar mounts here. Now, in the King Hauler kits and some of the earlier kits, they come with a little paper bag that's got longer screws than the instructions tell you to use. And there's a little separate instruction sheet in here that says use these instead of the short ones. And the reason for that is when the kit originally came out, the shaft didn't have this big flat spot on it. And the gear didn't need to be as long. Now, because the gear has to go way through, to hit that flat spot, it needs to be longer. So we're going to put one of those on my wrench. Right there. A little drop of thread lock. There's a couple places in the King Hauler kit where you have to use those longer screws. So open that little bag and read those instructions and make appropriate marks. Okay, that's our output. So there we go. That is put together. Now I'm going to add this final shaft right here. And notice I'm showing every single step. You could speed through this thing and watch what you want, but if you want to follow along and build a transmission, I wanted to show every single step. The instructions are quite good, but sometimes it's really nice to have a video. And that is our completely assembled transmission. Now, when I move this, you can look at this output and see how fast it's turning. Then if I shift it, you can see it's turning faster or much slower. So that's low gear, medium gear, high gear. Everything's shifting good and working good. So I'm going to add the snap ring here and the snap ring here, which are those little nightmare tiny E-clips. I think I'll do those off camera because I don't need to do those on camera. You can fight with those yourself, but I will just put those on and snap them on with a pair of pliers. Okay, you can see I've got my little snap rings on. The final piece is the shift ball. Again, a little thread lock. It just mounts in here. Slides on the shaft. And the handy dandy Tamiya wrench. We'll tighten that up. And later that's where our servo will hook to shift it. Now, remember I said I didn't like to grease these gears when I was putting it together because my hands get all greasy. It makes it really hard to put everything in. So now is the time to grease the gears. Actually, before that, I'm going to go ahead and mount the motor. The motor's pretty simple. Just mounts in here. Paper disc. And we use this little gear. It uses a standard length Allen screw, not the long one. There is a flat spot on the shaft. Just put it on there, and then we're going to mount the motor in here using a couple of F screws. And one of the screws uses a washer, the screw on the slot. The screw in this hole, they don't use a washer. I always use Loctite on these. Loctite. Just that so the gears lash is good. Should be just a little tiny bit of space at the bottom of the gears. I don't know if you can see that, but okay, now it's time to grease it. So now my favorite is to just start turning the gears and start putting some of the ceramic grease on and getting them all wrapped together. About out. They give you plenty, but I started with a partial tube because that's what I had laying in my shop. Greased up. Okay, grab another tube of that. And then I need to grease up these shift balls. same thing. I'm going to turn them, get some grease in those slots. We want to get nice grease in these slots, and the shift pawls will work it around. So there we go. We're all greased up. Everything looks good. The case halves just snap around here. Now these have capture points for the nuts. We put those in there and then use the bolt from the back side. But before we do that, I'm going to hook this to some power so I can show you how it operates. I'll leave that back side on so you can see better, and I'll get some power. Alright, I'm going to do a little demonstration here. Let's have a standard battery. Not high tech, but it'll run it just fine. And nice and slow so we can see what's going on. So what you want to watch is the output shaft, because that's what's going to change as we shift the gears. So we're going to shift it to low, and you'll see that slow down, medium, and then high. And you can see how the shift slides, slow, medium, high. So that's our 3 speeds. Now I'm going to go ahead and drop these nuts in here. Same thing as I've done before. A little bit of thread lock on these. Okay, well, I'm going to take a minute and put the rest of those in. And there is the finished transmission ready to install. So that really wasn't that hard to build. I hope that was pretty clear how we put it together. And all the Tamiya 3-speed transmissions build very similarly. So thank you for watching. If you like my video, please subscribe to my channel. I do all kinds of Tamiya semi-truck builds and other unusual things. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a redo of an earlier transmission build video I did, but I thought I could do a little bit better job of showing every single detail. So thank you again for watching.